Welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. My name is Bruce Gemmell. This is episode 33, Value and Consequence. I'm Bruce Gemmell. I'm Director of Research at Art Science Complex, which is kind of like a research group in interdisciplinary arts and sciences. I'm a researcher in architecture and related fields and a draftsman. These are a series of ruminations I've been doing about things as related to my work. And as a result of that, we've kind of come to this point. This started as a series of ruminations on another platform, which kind of ran into complications. As a result, I decided to kind of start again and then do it on this platform, which has been much more forgiving and much more understandable, much more agreeable. As a result, we've come to this point. So let me kind of trace my steps back a little bit and kind of give you an idea of kind of where we are. My first talk, which was the 1st of December 1920 in 24, was the operation of the metaphor. The operation of the metaphor was basically my explanation of the way in which I operate in my work and in terms of the things that I do. I talked about the operation of metaphor as something that I see as a kind of like organizational structure within nature. I don't see it as simply that which is what most people assume, which it is part of like language or aesthetics. But basically, it just kind of exists there as an analogous reference to that which is the larger construct in nature. From there, we talked about that. Then we talked about the natural metaphor. We talked about the artificial or the aesthetic metaphor, which is the one that we kind of know or refer to more. And then I talked about something which has kind of become, valuable throughout these talks, which was the idea of what I call the unbreakable bonds or the proto-metaphor. And what I meant by that, kind of something we're going to talk about tonight, was the fact that there are certain things that become created in that metaphorical sense, but instead of being kind of like aesthetic or natural, these were kind of sociological or kind of like societal. So we find that these were things that were kind of valuable, and it also kind of like helped me understand the work of other people, as kind of I felt as if there was kind of an understanding that also related to their work as well. From there, I went into certain things as kind of basis of my own work in terms of architecture and research. I talked about the value and necessity of criticism. And I talked about that as the art of finding what needs to be said, and then the view of criticism as an indicator of societal health, which was an idea I went back to later, which is the fact that once we create unbreakable bonds, which are basically breakable, but value, the term is used in terms of its value and the fact that it has a necessity that shows itself to be useful, which is something we're going to talk about tonight. It can be used to see how society treats it. I mean, because what happens is once kind of people see something is consequential or valuable, the reality is how well do they treat it? And if they do, what does that indicate about that society? From there, we went into things about the work specifically, talked about the idea of architecture as a verb, as a process, talked about drawing, and then I talked about my own work as what I call organic architecture. Then from that, kind of like went into some kind of like principles of I called about the authority of ideas. And then I talked about my past architecture, which was basically my youth, kind of the things that kind of generated the path in which I took. Then I went from there to what I call my recent past architecture, which was the work of when I was in school and when I was a professor. And then from that, I talked about the aftermath, or kind of like the beginning of like my kind of specifics in terms of, what I call organic design thinking. From there, I talked about, we went back to the idea of the indicators of societal health, talked about emotional attachment to ideas, understanding and judgment, and what is an unbreakable bond specifically. And then I talked about its importance, and then the importance of unbreakable bonds. Like, why is it? What are important unbreakable bonds, and what are the importance of the concept? From there, I talked about like the difference between rule and persuasion. Kind of went into some principles about things that have kind of influenced me. Talked about the work of Alfred North Whitehead. talked about the work of David Hume, talked about different people. I mean, I'm not a philosopher. I don't have a philosophy background. I don't even know if I read extensively, but I feel as if the pieces that I've read, I've kind of tried to absorb, and I appreciate those things, and I try to make them important to, understanding the work that makes sense to me. Then later on, we kind of finished with the concept of love, truth, and beauty, which kind of came from the kind of like the kind of the Whitehead's view of movement towards civilization. Talked about it as kind of like possibly evidence of or precipitant of is an obligate or commensal relationship. Then I talked about love, which was a principle that I kind of took that was different than the ones pertaining to you know um, the ones that was laid out by Whitehead. And then I kind of thought to myself, well, what were these things um, that kind of bonded them together? He talked about the pieces that kind of made sense, and then I kind of thought to myself, what were those things, and how did they kind of kind of correlate? So we went to the fact that there were these kind of 5 principles that were truth, beauty, adventure, art, and peace. And peace was that idea of kind of like a very important part of that. I kind of used love as a kind of binding consequence, which I kind of lifted from Ortega Gasset, and his ideas of kind of like the idea of intellectual love, and talked about that. That was kind of like the original 26 pieces that were on the original kind of train of thought. And then I kind of went to the fact that I kind of rather than change it up or whatever. I mean, I think that I tried to be as clear to just kind of repeating, even though at times I thought this was something that I kind of rethought, or this is something I kind of came to have a better understanding of, or kind of worse understanding of, or realized that the position was kind of somewhat shallow. So as a result, I kind of started finding myself kind of making kind of correlations and kind of like iterations. Anyway, from there, I started talking about the new pieces, which were the pieces that kind of lead me up to where I am now. So the first one was, let's see, this was like the idea of kind of organic or inorganic architecture, because I find myself that I've made this transition, towards my own work. I mean, I started out as what I would say was a kind of like an inorganic impulse, but I kind of came to understand and desire an organic impulse. And then I kind of found as if those kind of things were things that still were kind of inherently working through my own, pieces. And then I kind of came to understand that those things were kind of going to continue to advance over time. Then we talked about nature and perspective within the metaphor, which is something that I felt was kind of something. And then, we kind of went on through that. So anyway, brings us to today's piece, which is called which is called value and consequence, which are ideas that I've used throughout these talks, but kind of feel as if they kind of have a need to be kind of explained. I mean, I took the time to talk about the specifics of unbreakable bonds, but now I feel it's important to, kind of talk about these things, because I've used these terms. I think it's important to kind of explain what they mean. But before that, which is the thing that I've been doing, which I really enjoy, I want to talk about what's new in Julie. So what's new in Julie is usually a segment where Julie explains to us where she is in her work, what's going on, what's new, and what things we have to look forward to. So if you are ready, let's talk about what's new in Julie. Now, I know there's some really good things coming up in terms of where we are. We kind of made some headway, and there was kind of one major achievement, which I think is very, very important, which kind of leads towards some things to look for the future. But it's kind of like something that kind of just transpired. Also, Julie has some things that are kind of she's working on with different organizations that kind of will hopefully, well, not hopefully, but which will kind of, it's a question of what fruit it bears rather than like if it will. I think it's just a question of how well it works out. But she has some things that we've talked about that are in the works. So anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. But so are we ready?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, take your time. Take your time. So, okay. So what's new in Julie? So what is new in Julie?
Okay, well, I completed my drawing, which is actually the blueprint. I don't want to call it a sketch. It's not. It's a very, very involved, complete, detailed drawing. I completed that. It's the blueprint for my new painting.
Okay, you want to show it to us? Do you have it?
Yeah, sure. I'll
Great
get
to see it. I'm gonna kind of go on a personal note, even though like it's kind of like it's the reason we're a little bit down and don't have our regular energy is that one of the things that's daunting in life is these kind of like inconvenient circumstances that seem to just kind of like haunt you, and they're kind of like annoying and inappropriate. So one of our obligations as, part of our society is to kind of like is jury duty. And that, you kind of feel like, yes, I appreciate, the fact that we live in a country that has, the rule of law and understands the value of, making that law universal and valuable, so it's kind of equal and available to all people who are in this country. Unfortunately, sometimes those things, as much as you want them to kind of fit comfortably within other things, it doesn't always work that way. And in fact, I was recently on jury duty in Queens, and it was kind of like a really kind of unfortunately difficult time because I was transferring between a job that we were finishing and another job that was starting. And I thought this was an incredibly inconvenient time.
It was the worst possible time, yeah.
Fortunately for me, because I guess there's not a lot of either crime being committed, which is unlikely, or a crime being prosecuted, which is more likely. There was a 3-hour episode where I kind of sat in the jury room, and then we were released. So that turned out to be dodging a bullet.
It did.
Julie now has a circumstance that's come up at a time that really conflicts with another circumstance, which is very important to us.
Yes, it is.
So it's one of those things you're like, this is really a very inopportune time. But something that we will, and we just found this news tonight. So it's like, things were going well, things were kind of getting on track, but the thing is, you can't really, it seems at times you really can't avoid these.
We have no control over the jury duty.
No, we don't, and we don't have any control over the consequences they cause to the other aspects of our life. And I mean, art science complex is a delicate balance, right? And it doesn't make a lot of money, and it doesn't really kind of supply for us, but it is our desire in our life, so we kind of stay at it, and hopefully this won't cause any real turmoil. Anyway, so what we have here is
you want me to hold the bottom?
Yeah, can
hold
you?
The top? Yeah,
is the
it's kind of a
completed sketch.
Job. It's
I mean, Julie, it's not really a sketch,
large.
it's a completed drawing
And we
for
move it up.
Julie's painting. Now, what we did here, I think I got it.
Oh, all right.
What we have here
I'll take a
is the fact that Julie has completed the drawing, which will basically be the format for the painting. And considering the fact that we're now mid-July, like we're looking at the fact that given the complexity, intricacy of this, and the kind of time frame, we're looking at this painting being done probably around Thanksgiving.
Probably.
Yeah, which is nice because what we'll do is we realize this is a little bit bigger than the paper that Julie really likes to work on, but we found that the scale is correct. So what we'll do is we're going to do a diptych and we're probably going to cut it somewhere around, let's see, it was going to be cut, let's see, we're kind of thinking like right around here.
Should we zoom in close so they can see it?
Between the eye, so right about there. So that kind of like at the top, we have the kind of like
that's better
composers
to get less glare.
And the conductors of the play. And then the bottom, which is a larger portion, is the action of the play itself between Baron Schmiedel and his four performing mice. So, Julie, let me tell us again a little bit about this.
I can talk about it for
and then we'll kind of show it again. So that way.
On the other note, fortunately, I have some other people who have a vested interest in having me someplace else.
Yes.
Right. So they will have to make sure that is the case because it doesn't serve them.
No.
And I do have a letter. And it was just send them the letter.
Right.
So anyway, the proposed title, which I came up with that I rather like for this, is Gilded Terrors of a Court Jester, which I rather like as a title.
I do too.
Yeah. And what that really means is Baron Schmiedel, who's not a baron, actually.
Or a Schmiedel.
He's not a Schmiedel either, actually. It's true. That wasn't his name. Was the main court jester for King Augustus II of Germany. He was the son of Augustus the Strong, and his son was not strong. In fact, had a very bad temper and a very poor sense of humor because and was very, very fickle in his likes, his colleagues. He was very ill-tempered. In fact, through the partner, a guy named Froelich, I believe, of Baron Schmiedel, in prison for pulling a prank that he didn't find particularly funny. They had to spring his partner to prevent execution. So Baron Schmiedel, the court jester, lived in constant fear of being imprisoned.
To be fair, no one has ever tried to execute us yet.
Great.
No, I mean, there's a plus.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say what the future holds, but I mean, it's like I know there's some people that would like to get rid of us, but at the same time,
a lot.
We have never had, a kind of like government sanction against our
They would
existence.
if they could.
So there are some people individually who would if they could. That is for certainly true.
Anyway, so the idea is this court jester is living a very luxurious life, but it's a borrowed life. It's on loan. I mean, it's in fact not his. And at the wave of the hand of the king, it's all gone because, they were constantly trying to entertain a king who really could not be entertained. And you never knew when a prank wouldn't go over well. And obviously they did not. He was working with 4 trained mice who, it's funny that this was inspired by a Meissen porcelain sculpture bust, a life-size bust at the Met on the first floor in the Meissen galleries, which are surrounded by these very opulent objects. Poor people did not own Meissen. These were wine carafes and tea sets and coffee urns, and they were extremely luxurious items. This is a white Meissen, sculpted bust by someone named like Joachim Johann Candler, I believe, who sculpted it. But it shows a man apparently with 4 wonderful pet mice who seem very fond of him. But I read up and did my own research that is not on the curatorial tag. It seems that this court jester had a dread fear of rodents. I mean, hated them. And I'm sure the rodents hated him back. Yet they also needed him, or they would be chucked out into the wild and plucked up probably within moments by a bird of prey, which is what you see in my drawing.
Mm-hmm.
So his chest, with his vest, his very opulent laces and vest, opens up for a grotto of fear. I mean, a grotto where you have basically, two owlets being predated on by a snake. The mice are coming out of his vest as they are in the sculpture, hanging out of his mouth, and an owl is flying in from the distance over his shoulder with a disemboweled mouse in its claws. Uh, and in fact, this is the world that the mice have. In fact, so were a bunch of neuroscience studies on what's called fear extinction. And it caused quite a furor, in fact, because fear extinction was thought to be possible. And it's not really, from what I've read, if I did not misinterpret the data, is that fears will come back. They can be touched off and triggered by all sorts of things, not banished from the memory and from memory engrams forever, as was thought possible. Is you can't really banish those particular, figures of fear.
My suspicion on that idea is the fact that there's a tremendous amount of redundancy in terms of storage and kind of correlation of images, and I believe it's like it's
In
not
the
like
human brain?
we think like, oh, there's a particular thing and we just put it in a box and we recall it when we need it. I think that's a kind of rather simplistic way. So okay, Puddle?
No.
Oh, pee.
Okay, I have to get my water.
All right.
I'll be right back. I have water.
Okay.
And I have it here. Okay. Okay, I'm
No,
back.
I think that idea that that like there's that an idea is an actual thing that we just kind of can pluck out and kind of put in a box and kind of pull it up when we need to. It's obviously, I think it's a much more complex thing than that, and I believe that there's kind of probably a tremendous amount of kind of like network redundancy in terms of how these things can be correlated. So the idea that you can eliminate it completely through one particular circuitry is just kind of like is a bit naive. So, but tell us about the story that you've created in terms of what's happening here.
What is happening is at the very top of this drawing, it looks like a sailing ship, and in fact, it is a sterling silver replica of a sailing ship. But this is a very particular artifact. This is also German. Very involved objects in the Kunstkammer, the Cabinet of Curiosities. This was called a nef, which I believe is actually French. And this was actually placed at the head of a table to denote that person who actually held power, not just over the table or the feast or the banquet, over the household or the castle or the kingdom. So the head, like the king, would have had a nef in gold or silver placed at his place setting at the table. So this denotes who is really in charge, which are the mice. I have drawn in a second set of the same four mice, not as play actors in the jester's pranks. And you want me to grab this?
I got it.
And in the jester's, hijinks trying to entertain a king, but they are running experiments and taking notes and watching from their position of power, which is this nef. And I've turned that into an observation laboratory. I've actually added a lot of elements from several observation
Mm-hmm.
laboratories that are circulating above
Mhm.
Earth.
Yep.
And one has a conductor's wand, one has a book of notes, the other has a stopwatch.
Mhm.
So, would you like to comment on what the mice are doing? Because
Yeah, I
think
mean,
you
I
actually-
think that it kind of, I mean, when we talked about this, I remember like thinking about Scheherazade and the 1001 Arabian Nights, where, you kind of had a situation where you wanted to kind of like prolong the circumstance as best you could, and kind of like try to avoid this incredibly precarious circumstance. And as much as the Scheherazade story is an incredibly beautiful story, at the same time it's a very timeless idea. I mean, many people live in this kind of precarious circumstance, but I think what you did was you actually realized that the mice saw the frailty of this individual and realized that their circumstance was wedded to this person who didn't like them, didn't really want to help them, except the fact that it helped him. But they also saw the fact that he was somewhat ill-equipped for the ability to keep them safe. So they kind of took it in their own hands to basically kind of like try to kind of like take control of circumstances as best they could to conduct the performance in order to kind of save their lives, because they had come to understand the fact that the domesticated aspect of life was certainly preferable to the field.
Yeah, or the grotto or the wild,
Mhm.
where they are the prey for literally everything.
Right. Whereas in
So,
this case, it's like it's
yeah.
precarious, but it's something that they felt like there was more potential for control over. So now we have this idea that we're going to kind of like make the separation, do the diptych, and then kind of find, get the paper started and kind of get on, because you don't function well when you don't have a painting.
No, I don't function well. I mean, I finished my other painting
Mm-hmm.
a couple months ago, so
Is it that long already?
yeah.
No, and I mean, given the kind of tumultuous circumstance that we all find ourselves in, the things that you can kind of do to kind of stabilize yourself are certainly of your benefit.
They're tremendously
Yeah,
necessary.
Yep. Which brings us to today's. You want to have any final closing thoughts on this, so we can kind of go to our discussion for tonight?
Well, yes, I'll just say the closing.
Say.
Sure. Well, the closing thoughts, and there will be a couple things I will be adding, just because this is a very finished, very involved drawing, are the trappings of a borrowed wealth. I mean, it's not his, he was a jester, but he was obligated to be in the bedroom with the king. I mean, he was there 24 hours a day. He was basically a slave, he was basically a servant,
A gilded slave.
He was a gilded servant, a gilded slave. He had no freedom. He had to go on hunts with the king. He didn't like going on hunts. I mean, he basically had no freedom ever. So, in the Grotto of Fear is a very elaborate Meissen gilded teacup that's half buried in the moss. I also added a number of lichens, specifically because lichens are there. You know that there are lichens over 9,000 years old. They actually trump mycelium. They are that old, and lichens, they produce a kind of an acid. They actually eat away at the substrate, which is perfect. So I added a lot of lichens into the grotto, and we'll be adding a few other pieces of flatware, possibly part of a teapot, jutting out from the grotto, which emerges from the hollows of the jester's chest.
Like there's matter and antimatter, right? Is there a lichen and a dislichen?
That's funny.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, probably.
Yeah, probably. So,
Yeah.
okay. So that brings us to today's topic, which is trying to give some kind of flesh to the concepts of value and consequence. Now, again, one of the things I think happens with an individual, especially kind of one who engages in the kind of speculative endeavors, is you kind of create your own lexicon. So the thing is, one of the things that we learned early here was the fact that the term metaphor has a highly refined meaning within the context of the way in which we use it. Now, Julie has her definition, I have my definition, we have a common definition. But these are things that we've worked upon and kind of like developed in terms of our own understanding of them and their history. I mean, we're not changing the etymology, we're not changing the synonyms, we're just basically saying this is, when I use this term in terms of my work, this is what that term means. And I think, people who have a kind of like a kind of theology or a kind of philosophy, or in terms of the way in which they kind of engage in their activities, there usually is a need for kind of like a highly specific definition of certain terms. So given that, I think that value and consequence are two things that need to be kind of like at least defined specifically in terms of the way in which we use it. So I would say quickly to say, one of the things we kind of found interesting is that I looked this up just to kind of like find a kind of parameters for this, and I kind of found that both words are somewhat related to each other. But what I found was that a synonym of consequence was value, but I did not find that consequence was a synonym of value. So what happens is, there is an understanding of in the concept of consequence that appreciates the term value, but in the term value, it doesn't extend to consequence. The etymologies are such that both come from the Old French. Value basically deals with worth, and consequence deals with the result of something. So the fact is, both talk about the same thing of what is this and why is it valuable. I mean, the subtitle tonight is what constitutes the reality and what makes them important. So the idea is, like, when we use the terms value and consequence, we can somewhat use them interchangeably, but there's a value in knowing the difference. So in terms of that, right, the fact is we all can say, like, these are the consequences of this action, or the consequence will be such. But the thing is, that consequence, when we talk about that consequence has been brought to a point of focus because it has some need to be clarified. And that clarification usually is a result of some kind of merit, which kind of brings us closer to the idea of what we talk about in terms of value or worth. Now, how do we determine? The bigger question is, how do we determine the worth of something? And how is that societally determined? And how is that individually challenged? Society will create a kind of idea of the value of something. One of the things I found interesting was that when we talked about this recently and a couple of other things, when Whitehead talked about commerce, well, what I found interesting when I read the piece about power to persuasion, which was a result of understanding this movement from a kind of like a rudimentary kind of like power-based dynamic to a kind of persuasive-based dynamic as we move towards civilization. I found it curious, but then once it was explained to me, I saw the relevance in the idea of commerce, because commerce really deals with the idea that there can be a difference in terms of what people see as value, the value that is believed to be what this individual sees as opposed to that, and the way in which these things are kind of bartered. Because there is the kind of selling of goods and services, but there is the trading of value. And the idea is these things kind of can be incredibly interesting. One of the things that Julie and I have talked about is that we feel as if the values that society holds are things that need to be understood and need to be challenged if one feels as if they're kind of out of balance. Now, one of the reasons we talk about kind of like unbreakable bonds is because these things become important because we realize there's a reason to change the connection between certain concepts in order to gain an advantage. And the example we always used is the fact that in order to kind of understand how technology can advance at a better pace and be more effective, was instead of wedding technique to superstition or religion or things like that, we decided in the West to wed technology to reason. So technology were related to reason, logic, science. So as a result, we were able to kind of like temper and advance our technologies to a much greater degree as a result of that. So as a result, right, value is something that as a result creates commerce. Commerce creates profit. It also creates destitution. But the point is, this is a contention and goes back to what we're talking about criticism. So to bring it all back around, what are the things that we see in this case that could conceivably be revealing a lack of societal health or a blight or a kind of concern for societal reform? Any ideas or anything you'd like to talk about in regards to that?
It's a very broad topic.
Yes, P.
Can you ask me a specific question? That would be
Okay.
more helpful.
All right. As an artist, we exist in the realm of art, architecture, or what we call speculation. The speculative ventures, anything from mathematics, philosophy, theology, and these kind of like endeavors where ideas are kind of very much a product, and that the results of these ideas kind of like become something that are kind of looked upon by different people as having different concerns. Just the same way that we can kind of like understand the fact that there are reasons why not only will people kind of be able to speculate on who is the world's greatest artist, their idea is that like this is actually a consequential and valuable kind of conversation to have. What is the great contributions? What were they for? How were they necessary? So if you were to be asked, do you feel that the societal health of art is robust, declined, collapsed?
Okay. It's certainly far from robust. I mean, it's past the decline to the point of obliteration. I mean, I'm not trying to paint a grim picture, but art used to really have a consequence. The contemporary art that's being played at now is politically correct. It is to further the goals of groups of people who are pushing their own social or political agendas. It's not about the art, and it should only be about the art. I mean, art should be proposing ideas, art should be cure for the soul. Art certainly has been a political tool. It's not supposed to be for personal aggrandizement or someone who's got a personal axe to grind because they feel that they're marginalized. I mean, I find the contemporary art world is full of work that proposes very, very little. Um, where a curator may write paragraphs of text on a wall trying to impart ideas to some pretty specious stuff, where the person who generated it, even if they even did, I mean, there are people using artificial intelligence to craft something that they didn't even make and had very, very little hand in. I mean, art would be drawn, sculpted, painted, crafted with incredible amounts of care and artistry and time and technique, and most importantly, concepts, real ideas where the artist was really, really informed, and they read and they studied and they cultivated their minds. Now people will churn something out in an hour and expect, applause. So yeah, I think that what's being shown now is really an abomination
Mm,
and really quite an embarrassment.
I think so. I think that
Yeah.
like I think there's a lot of reasons behind that, but I mean the reality is
Yeah.
like, you know, I mean when Whitehead was talking about those factors that kind of benefit a kind of like presence of society, art was one of them. You know, adventure was one of them. Peace, art, truth, beauty, adventure, art, and peace. And peace, like not necessarily like the fact that no one's kind of punching each other in the face. It's just the idea of kind of like a fine action or a fine kind of like attitude. And I think that what happens is, one of the things that I think is exploited, unfortunately, and this goes back to the idea of value for me, is the fact that I don't, the question of, is there an objective truth? Is there an overall truth that can be understood? Is there such thing as absolute truth? This is a contended issue. It's been a contended issue. It'll always be a contended issue. It's a fascinating philosophical subject. My feeling, based on the things that I believe, is the fact that there is a such thing as absolute objective truth, but it's unattainable to humans. And I think based on, understanding certain things, the reason why it's unattainable to us, not because it's not capable of being attained, is that we don't have the potential to have the universality of perspective. Is that the point of views can be contradictory, and unless one is capable of having all points of view, right, one is kind of always going to be lacking necessary information. However, one of the things that kind of Hume brings up, which is kind of consequence, has value, is the fact that there's a certain utility to those things that you find. And you can kind of test these things over and over again and see how well they serve you. Now, the reality is, tomorrow it may not serve you, even though it served you yesterday. And I use the example of a map. If one is into a new terrain and one tries to kind of like navigate that terrain, the ability to kind of jot down notations and put down information in order to kind of circumvent and kind of navigate this place, that map has a value. The value is it allows you movement to be able to kind of attain certain activities and tasks. Doesn't guarantee that the tasks will be successful, doesn't guarantee that you'll be successful, you'll survive, but it does allow you to kind of like better understand the terrain by basic marking off distances and kind of taking, like taking note of landmarks, such as like the things that you would need to visit in order to kind of get your sustenance or to kind of get your, sleep or whatever. So if there is no universal map of ultimate kind of correlation to this landscape, there are at least useful things that give you a better understanding, a kind of like that can approach the universal. Now, how close it gets to it, it depends on the kind of like the complexity and the intricacy and the depth. So there will never be complete understanding, but there will basically be better over time as more perspectives can be kind of like attained by individuals. And that's one thing we're talking about, recently, is that one of the things that one should strive for when one is looking to get a deeper understanding is that provocative viewpoint, that provocative perspective that allows you to kind of be able to kind of attain a perspective on the information that's unique, that allows you to kind of get a deeper insight. So again, these are this circumstance. So again, to return to the idea that value and consequence are related, I will use them kind of, almost interchangeably. But there is an important aspect about the fact that when using the idea of consequence, the purposefulness of the consequence comes from an activity. Something was done that kind of allowed something to be discovered, and as a result, that thing that has been discovered is under scrutiny in order to kind of understand the potential of that value. So the action can lead to the value. In the terms of the word value itself, the value is basically that which is attained. The mystery, and this is kind of something that is kind of probably beyond the capabilities of myself, is to determine how we as a society figure out what is valuable and how we as an individual kind of conflict with that. An example would be Americans founded this country on a constitution. It put certain principles down. It put those principles down, and people have decided there's a kind of value in kind of for the majority deciding that kind of like
Yeah, jury duty.
jury
it
duty.
felt like the right time to make it.
No, it's true. Yeah. So we come to accept this idea of these principles like the rule of law or the sovereignty of the individual body or the idea of expression or kind of freedom to kind of believe certain things. These are really incredibly beautiful ideas that we see as consequential and use to govern ourselves. I think that there's certain things that I love about the idea that I don't have to agree with you, but I have to fight for your ability to be able to speak freely in disagreement. There's something really incredibly beautiful about that to me, that I can basically say it's important that this individual that I disagree with strongly has the right to speak freely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that I think people don't really appreciate as much as they should.
Ow.
Oh, pee.
I have toe
Ew,
cramps.
toe cramps.
That's why.
Okay, while we kind of massage toe
Thanks,
cramps.
I appreciate
I
it.
appreciate
Bruce
it.
gives great foot massage.
No, Bruce gives Julie great foot massages. Because, I mean, look, we don't need to appeal to the nerd girl community. We certainly have our own.
You're already a magnet, yes.
But we don't want the, don't want the nerd girl community. Oh, thank you, P.
Anyway,
and that doesn't mean any other community should take any interest either.
No.
Foot rubs are just for Julie.
Yes.
She deserve. Well, that's because you deserve it.
I give you a foot rub.
You do great rubbies. You do great rubbies.
You did a foot rub.
Yeah. So
if I may just bring up a quick point on the consequence.
Yes.
So
P.
one of the touch points. What do you want a tissue?
No. We're doing rubbies.
Thank you. Why I think most contemporary artwork has little consequence is precisely that one piece is virtually interchangeable with another. And real art, real original thinking manifested visually is never interchangeable with another original piece of art. I mean, my drawing is interchangeable with nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely nothing is a doppelganger for what I did. It can't be traded out like a shell game. When I'm in, and I've been in plenty of contemporary art galleries, and I'm talking from a very cultivated, very informed point of view, graduate of Cooper Union, went to art school, professional artist. What I see,
and
yes,
now an eminent architectural critic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is I've been in,
and in fact, let me just say, in following up on a great tradition of Cooper Union. In fact, like I remember, what was his name? Bob Slutsky, who was a painter, right? Was never an architect. Was actually one of the important critics in the architectural school during one of the periods of John Haydick's, kind of tenure as the dean at Cooper Union Architectural School. But, that idea of the understanding between balance, organization, consequence, composition, right? Yeah. These were the things that kind of allowed Slutsky And I actually had the benefit of being I had the benefit of being on a few juries with him,
Nice.
not at Cooper, but at Tech.
Mhm.
And I found that
Mhm.
like there was an ability for the students at Cooper to have that understanding of the fact that there was a very deep correlation between art and architecture in terms of organizational strategy, composition, and construction. And though I kind of like felt it was important to kind of understand the difference between construction and composition, uh, he didn't really feel that was the same uh, necessity. But at the same time, I think the way in which you study art at Cooper Union is very linked to the way in which one would study architecture, at least in that period,
Mhm.
which I think you kind of came in. You would probably kind of be part of the end of that.
I was
Yeah,
one of the last great. Yeah.
yeah,
So what I was saying is when one goes, and I've been to plenty of gallery openings, plenty of contemporary art galleries in several major cities, including this one. Uh, the work is so puerile, it's so infantile, it's so amateurish. One piece literally
it's
is
interchangeable.
virtually
Yeah,
interchangeable with another because they lack consequence to such a degree that they are literally cookie cutters out of a template. They're just stamped out. I mean,
uh,
there is nothing original or singular about them. I
uh,
mean, the word unique never enters into the
no,
pantheon,
no.
and it should.
It's funny. I mean,
Yeah.
like when I was a boy,
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree with it. I'm gonna kind of follow up
Yeah.
on this point. When I was a boy, I remember the fact that like there was even though I was just a boy, there were certain artists whose names were household names. I mean,
Mhm.
everyone knew the name Picasso. Everyone knew the name, kind of Dali.
Salvador Dali.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone, like for the most part. I mean, again, I came from as out there on the fringe
Yes,
of,
you did.
I came from as anti-intellectual home, but this were people who kind of like swung hammers and dug ditches. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but even in that environment, the name Picasso, the name Dali, kind of like even like Leger, these were names that one would hear. Whereas I think even in like a lot of I'd say fairly cultivated homes, it would be, and again, Frank Lloyd Wright, right? In cultivated homes, you might not be able to kind of name a single artist or like have it to be a kind of household name. There's certainly no household name artists. I'd say the last one, and kind of like I find it was just a kind of vestige of kind of like necessity, was Andy Warhol, and I never kind of gave much
He
consequence to
couldn't
that.
draw and he couldn't paint. I mean, he was not even a real artist.
No, I don't think he was. I
He
mean,
had
it's
a
like okay,
factory that was literally called the factory.
yeah. I mean, I remember once there was a kind of like it was Film Forum was having you know, a kind of retrospective of some of the kind of films that he made, and there was a lot of people who were looking kind of trying to look very uninterested in being interested. And there was a kind of person there who was making a film, and they kind of said like, tell us what you think of the work of Andy Warhol. And I said like, I don't think of the work of Andy Warhol.
I don't either, ever.
And it seemed like it kind of very much deflated this individual. But I said like, I mean,
it's not work.
I mean,
he didn't have a body of work.
I mean, he was someone who cultivated a lot of attention. But I think it's interesting because I mean, in the '80s, up until I don't know when he died, but whenever it was, it just seemed as
doesn't really matter, does it?
no, it didn't, because what's interesting is now you couldn't find any. I mean, it's like people will
Yeah.
still talk about it at Sotheby's or whatever. But I mean, I think what happened was in New York City in the '80s, there was still this kind of idea of like that there was a consequence to what he did. But it's amazing how quickly that evaporated.
Because it was of no consequence.
Exactly.
And in fact, it was a cult of personalities. And I saw a documentary at Film Forum, interestingly, and it was on the Wyeth family.
Right.
I believe specifically on the work of Jamie Wyeth, the grandson of
Uh-huh.
NC
Uh-huh.
Wyeth. And Andy Warhol came up only because it seemed, as weird as it was, he formed a friendship, which was more intense jealousy,
Mm.
because all
Friendship of
the Wyeths
opportunity.
could actually really draw and paint. I
They
mean,
could.
they
They could.
actually had skill, and he would come and draw in Warhol's factory room, and he talked about the intense jealousy.
Mm.
And I don't think that relationship really lasted because it was terribly lopsided.
Mm. Yeah. Well, again, we've kind of gotten a little bit far afield, but
Sorry.
I think we should. But we both did it. I mean, but that's actually an important
I
point.
thought
But
it was.
no,
Yeah.
no, it was. And I think we should return to this because I think that idea of like, we've talked a little bit about it. And I was asked by someone to kind of talk about this. It's like I talked about, what was it that kind of like, kind of derailed the kind of, or the organic impulse that's starting to kind of cultivate in the architectural world today. And, I kind of like, I understand a little bit of what it was and how it happened and the aftermath of the failure of the last 45 years. But at the same time, I don't know what happened in the art world where we went from, it being of incredible consequence in terms of society to being irrelevant. I mean, most people spend absolutely no time. And I think it's probably because no one's made a compelling argument for people, having any attention for it.
No, they don't
I
even
think
see how it connects to them, or
because it doesn't.
and most of it doesn't. But there are people, us, who are producing work about really vital ideas that I think connect to most people if they have the interest in cultivation and study of
But I
these
think
ideas.
that idea that there's a something in which one has to engage in. But I think that like what's happened is, one of the things that happens is if you don't pay attention to something, and this is something kind of like we've talked about at other times, is that you lose that ability, and once you lose that, you don't really understand or appreciate the other things that go with it, and that's kind of where we are in the fact that like once, and we're actually talking about this in a couple of weeks, where we talk about the loss of 2D design as a study and how that kind of starts to take away an important pillar of the things we were talking about. I mean, there's a kind of basis by which, by understanding drawing, which is what we believe, that by understanding drawing, one has an inherent like grasp into the visual consequence of a lot of speculative endeavors.
Yeah.
All speculative endeavors can exist visually, and as a result, benefit from drawing. In fact, one of the things that was, I remember the great exhibit that I saw of Freud's drawings at the American College of Surgeons up on, was it 106th Street or something?
Yeah, up there.
Anyway, so we've come to the conclusion, and we will have to revisit this because I think we've only scratched the surface. I didn't realize how far-reaching
kind of a
this
vast
was.
topic.
It's vast.
Right.
It's vast. Like it's like the Star Trek vastness of space.
Well, yeah, it's better.
Real Star Trek.
Real Star. But it's better.
Not that Captain Picard thing.
You know what? I like the Next Generation.
You're pretty.
But not Voyager. Is terrible.
Oh God.
That was awful.
And that was the one with the woman's like, my hands are on my hips. The woman who had the Patricia Neal
And
voice.
the Vulcan with absolutely no sense of humor.
No.
I mean, a dry sense of humor.
Okay, so next week, the topic is, let's see, critique of the present non-organic architecture. Oh, cool. All right, I was talking now about today. So, okay, so the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to maintain this. Thank you.
Thank you.